We're now going to jump back into the timeline and look at the events that we can document on the dates that we can kind of get a good indication of. June was an incredibly busy month. Joseph and Oliver had moved from Harmony through to Fayette, New York, and were living at the Whitmer farm. I believe the books after 4th Nephi, Mormon, and Ether were then written in Fayette. But one of the hard and fast dates we have is the 11th of June 1829, where Joseph went to Rochester to register the copyright for the Book of Mormon, and he did so by producing this title page. This is the original title page to the Book of Mormon that was included in the 1830 edition of the Book of Mormon. You'll see down the bottom it has by Joseph Smith, Jr., author and proprietor, and this has changed in subsequent editions to be translated by Joseph Smith, Jr. Here is the original document for that transaction, the idea that the copyright needed to be lodged, and this document is held by the Library of Congress. But you can go and see high-resolution scans of these things in the Joseph Smith Papers project. The title page identifies the work as the Book of Mormon and that it's written by the hand of Mormon upon plates taken from the plates of Nephi. It suggests that it is written to the Lamanites, and a year from now the Lamanites will be preached to by a mission to Indian Territory by Oliver, Zeba Peterson, Parley P. Pratt, and John Whitmer. And it's sealed up by the hand of Moroni and hid up to the Lord for the coming forth to the Gentiles. And also the interpretation is given by the gift of God. It also states there's an abridgment taken from the Book of Ether, who were scattered at the time the Lord confounded the language of the people when they were building a tower to get to heaven. So we're really talking about the Tower of Babel, and this enshrines the Book of Mormon into biblical law as history. But since it's written to the Lamanites, that they may know the covenants of the Lord, that they are not cast off forever. So it's a redemptive work, a work of missionary work to the Native Americans. And it closes with the understanding that Jesus is the Christ, the eternal God. And this is consistent with the Book of Mormon text being more modalist rather than Trinitarian, and certainly not a separate God and Jesus at this particular time. And this last bit talks about the idea that if there are any mistakes in this, mistakes of man, and this is the later edition, so it says translated by Joseph Smith Jr. We talked briefly earlier that this title page and this particular sentence has been changed for grammatical correctness in the later editions of the Book of Mormon. But one of the things that's worth mentioning is that this title page includes the abridgment of Mormon and also the abridgment of Moroni. It does not talk about the replacement text, Nephi to Omni, that is going to be done in Fayette, New York. It seems that at least on the 11th of June 1829, Joseph didn't know he was going to have to replace that text, and so it's not included in the title page. And this also suggests that we can date Nephi onwards as being after the 11th of June. And either Joseph doesn't not know, or he's still holding out hope that he's going to recover the lost manuscript. Joseph later says that the title page was the last leaf of the production of the Book of Mormon. So again, this aligns with that idea that it is a complete work at this point, or at least he still needs to recover the lost manuscript, but also suggests that this is not his, that this comes from Moroni or Mormon. And this is a little bit of a controversy later on. Who wrote this? It was identified as Moroni's writing for a number of the subsequent editions, but then dropped. This was done because it seemed problematic that Moroni would refer to his own writings in the third person. And so this controversy is shelved because nobody wants to talk about it or who this author might be, because it really looks like Joseph Smith, but he says it was on the plates. That is the story of the title page. We can cross-reference what is going on in the Book of Mormon with regard to what is happening in the revelations that Joseph is getting. June 1st, David Whitmer comes to rescue his friend Oliver Cowdery and Joseph Smith and bring them back to the Whitmer farm. The Whitmers are incredibly poor. This is their house. It looks like the log cabin of the Smiths, and it's just as cramped. So the idea of David taking days out of the farming schedule to go down to Harmony, Pennsylvania and pick up Oliver and Joseph is huge for the family. It's a major sacrifice. When you are this poor, there is no leeway. The Whitmers are German reformists. They speak German as their first language. The boys certainly are good in English, but particularly the women are likely not to have written in English because they sign their names with an X. As a family, taking in Oliver and Joseph and then Emma in the next couple of weeks is a major sacrifice. Because these people aren't contributing to the household either, right? They are busy with Book of Mormon stuff. And so the Smiths are a burden and the Whitmers are carrying them. But Joseph finds in the Whitmers kindred spirits. They are from the same folk magic tradition. This is David Whitmer's seer stone. Seer stones are incredibly important to this family. We know that Hiram Page has a seer stone also, and because we hear about that in Doctrine and Covenants 28 when he's getting revelation for the church, which Joseph doesn't like. And we see that Joseph, once he gets to Fayette and learns about the Whitmers, one of the things that he gives them is patriarchal blessings, or these revelations that suggest that they are special to God and that the work they are doing in their house is something that they should be proud of and invest in. These revelations to the Whitmers include now section 14, 15, and 16. David's revelation is in section 14. It's received via the Urim and Thummim. Of course, this is a later term, so really it's Joseph Smith's seer stone. And David, in his address to all believers some years later, talks about how Joseph gets these revelations in his seer stone. Verse 1 to 6 are pretty generic that we see with Hiram's blessing and also Joseph Knight Sr.'s blessing. But from verse 7, it's customized to David, suggesting that he can keep the commandments and endure to the end. Themes that are running through the Book of Mormon. The idea that he can ask the Father in faith, believing, and he will receive an answer by the gift of the Holy Ghost. And we see in verse 10 a charge to bring forth the fullness of the gospel from the Gentiles unto the house of Israel. So this idea that the Book of Mormon is for the Lamanites, for the Native Americans. And probably the most important thing about this particular section in Revelation is that he's given that charge that he shall be blessed both spiritually and temporally. And this is incredibly important to the Whitmers, of course, because they're making major sacrifices to have Oliver, Joseph, and Emma in their house, and that this work is going to mean their spiritual and also their temporal salvation. The Whitmers are now investors in this project. The next two sections, Doctrine and Covenants 15 and 16, are exactly the same, but they're given to two different brothers, John Whitmer, who's pictured here, and Christian Whitmer, who dies in 1836. David is significant because he becomes a witness and also ends up being a major leader in the church, the state president in Missouri, which Joseph designates as basically his right-hand man, the idea that he will be his successor if Joseph dies. John Whitmer is called on to a mission really early on the piece to go preach to the Lamanites in Indian Territory, but also he ends up being the first church historian, and so he's really important to documenting those really first early years. Both men are excommunicated in 1838 along with Oliver Cowdery when the church really changes from Ohio through to Missouri and Joseph needs to clear house. But the Whitmers' influence in bringing forth the Book of Mormon and establishing the early church is undeniable. They are the backbone. Because they are from the same folk magic culture, they establish the things that Joseph is doing as normal and important in bringing forth the Word of God and connecting the unseen world to the present. Now, we should also mention that these three revelations, 14, 15, and 16, are said to be done in June of 1829, but we don't know exactly when. Is this when Joseph first gets to Fayette? Is it later on in the month when they are being blessed for their sacrifice, is that actually into July we don't have any clue for this. But the ideas in the text suggest that it probably was early on, as Joseph and Oliver get to Fayette and are convincing the Whitmers of its importance in their lives, that they are part of this work, that they are an integral assignment from God. They are special, they are important, and they're going to get a great reward. Doctrine and Covenants section 17 is also purported to be in June of 1829, but it could well be past Doctrine and Covenants section 18 and 19 and is likely at the end of June. This revelation is the charge to Oliver Cowdery, David Whitmer, and Martin Harris to be witnesses for Joseph about the plates and the translation, so that this work will have credibility. Now, we know from Doctrine and Covenants section 5, which was given in March of 1829, that there's supposed to be 3 witnesses. Now, this was an evolving story because many of the people prior to that were told that everybody was going to see the plates, that they were going to be put on display and that people would be able to see all of this, but until then, they were kept by the Lord. But by Doctrine and Covenants section 5, when Martin Harris came to Harmony, Pennsylvania to inquire about the plates because he was getting a lot of pressure, particularly from his wife Lucy, Joseph gave the revelation that there would be 3 that would see this event. And this is mirrored again in Ether chapter 5 and then in 2nd Nephi chapter 11. The Joseph Smith Papers people, when they've done their revelatory introductions, suggest that this was done after the translation was finished, so at least the end of June, maybe even into July. We don't exactly know, but the idea that there wasn't many days between this revelation and the event that they witnessed to with their witness statement. The revelation in context suggests too that Joseph recalled later that Cowdery, Whitmer, and Harris became so very solicitous and teased me so much that at length I compiled and through the Urim and Thummim, or this is the seer stone of course, I obtained this revelation for them. This also suggests that these men were incredibly motivated to be these witnesses, and they were going to take every instruction on board when it came to their charge to do so. The idea that these revelations are coming through the Urim and Thummim, or in this case the seer stone that's now labelled later as the Urim and Thummim, is really important because, of course, if the witnesses have seer stones and Oliver Cowdery has a dowsing rod and Martin Harris believes in these visions and revelations, they are primed to be able to see these things from their magical worldview. One of the incredibly big issues of this revelation is that it tells the group that they're going to see a view of the plates and of the breastplate and the sword of Laban and the Urim and Thummim, or the seer stone. It goes on to say that it's going to see the miraculous directives which were given to Lehi, presumably this idea of the Liahona. And it's by faith that you will obtain a view of them. Now, the witness statement only talks about the plates. So why are they given this direction that they're going to see all of these things, and yet the plates is the only thing that they're going to testify to? This discrepancy is really problematic. It is the idea that they're going to see this in some kind of view, maybe in their mind's eye. And you see in verse 3 that they're going to see them with their eyes and testify of them. But the idea that they're going to get this view from faith, now this makes things quite problematic. And there's a really big reason that they're going to get this so that Joseph Smith Jr. may not be destroyed. So Joseph is going to get credibility and reliability that these things are real, because otherwise he's going to be destroyed. Why doesn't he just show them to everybody? So then there's no problem. Or why doesn't he display them like he has spoken about before in Harmony? Well, it's because these things are actually in his mind's eye, and he's realizing that he needs people who need to be able to see this from this magic worldview culture. And even the wording is odd, that they're going to see them even as my servant Joseph Smith has seen them. So the idea that If Joseph is seeing them in his mind's eye, that these are also going to see them in his mind's eye, not that Joseph has seen them physically and that they are now going to see them physically in the real world. And that he's translated them. I mean, two of these people are kind of his scribes. Martin Harris has been a scribe. Oliver Cowdery's been a scribe. David Whitmer, we're not aware of that he's been a scribe, but some of the Whitmer brothers are. But we know that they're watching this dictation process. So yes, gosh, they can testify to it. And the idea that they have to testify to God, this is woven together. And they're told that they have the same gift like Joseph. And this is Oliver Cowdery with his dowsing rod. This is David Whitmer with his seer stone. This is Martin Harris with his revelations. This commandment says that they are like Joseph. And they've given a commandment to do this. And they take this incredibly seriously. Jesus Christ is commanding them to do this and giving them a promise that if they do this thing for God and Joseph, that they will be able to go to heaven. Effectively, that their calling and election, their right to enter heaven is assured. This is an incredible promise, but it comes with a huge coercive element. And this revelation suggests something incredibly serious. Jesus Christ is talking to them, is commanding them. They have to obey. It's not an option to go off on some tangent or be thoughtful about it or be critically minded. This is their charge. And so you see the witness statement really try to adhere to the commandments that this revelation gives. And it's odd that the witness statement doesn't exactly match what the revelation says that they should be seeing. And the wording is odd. The idea that they are seeing through the grace of God the plates which confirm this record, which suggests that it's not a physical experience. They testify that it has been translated by the gift and power of God. And this to them means the seer stone. They really do think it's an instrument of God. They also say that his voice hath declared it unto us. Now, this voice that they're talking about is the revelation information. They equate the voice of God from the revelation that Joseph Smith is getting to be the voice of God, that Joseph's voice is God's voice. And so this is a really important key, because voice, it's not that they're actually hearing an auditory sound of God speaking to them. They are hearing God's voice through Joseph's revelation to them. And I think we can use the same idea of seeing. They are seeing these things because they are feeling them. They're not seeing them because they're using their eyes in a physical sense. So they testify to the engravings on the plates, but they don't talk about any of those other things that they're supposed to, which is the idea of the sword of Laban and the Liahona, the breastplate. Those things don't come up in this testimony. But they do testify to an angel of God coming down and laying before her eyes. This angel does not speak. This is interesting because, of course, this is labeled Moroni much later, and the understanding that Moroni is giving them this view and maybe even talking to them. But in this testimony, that is not the case. It's a purely visionary experience. There doesn't seem to be any interaction between the angel and the people except what they imagine him doing. And again, the idea that the voice of the Lord commanded us to bear record of it. And really, this is talking about that revelation in section 17. This is not an auditory voice of God. This is the command from the revelation. And they're doing it because they're going to dwell with him internally, because that's the promise of that revelation. And then at the end of it, they talk about the Holy Ghost, the Son, the Father, being one God, which is that same modalist principle that we've talked about several times. We also know that this event did not happen like this witness statement suggests, because there is an account that Martin Harris removed himself because he felt like they weren't getting this visionary experience because he was unworthy. Joseph directed this event with Oliver Cowdery and David Whitmer, and then went to Martin Harris and had a different event with him. The ways that these men related this experience into their lives suggested that it was a very personal experience, but they didn't exactly see the same things as everybody else, which suggests also that this is something that happened in their mind's eye, not necessarily something that happened as a collective experience. It may surprise you the evolution of the ideas of a church that is coming out of the writing of the Book of Mormon and the shift to the Whitmer farm in Fayette, New York. In Joseph's 1838 history, he talks about the time in the dictation sequence of the Book of Mormon that he and Oliver moved to Fayette, New York to be with the Whitmer family. David comes to get them from Harmony, Pennsylvania, and suggests that they live board-free in their house while this project is being finished, particularly that they give one of the brothers to assist with the workings. Joseph relates that we found Mr. Whitmer's family very anxious concerning the work and very friendly towards ourselves. It seems that Joseph is quite surprised, pleasantly surprised, because of course he doesn't know the Whitmers. David is Oliver's friend. And he says, in the meantime, David, John, and Peter Whitman Jr. became our zealous friends and assistants in the work. And remember in Harmony that Oliver and Joseph had baptized each other, and then Samuel had been baptized soon after. But on their coming to Fayette, New York, Joseph says, my brother Hiram Smith, David Whitmer, and Peter Whitmer Jr. were baptized in Seneca Lake, the two former by myself and the latter by Oliver Cowdery. Joseph says that from this time forth, others believed and were baptized. So this is the beginning of a movement. It's really starting to show, especially with the traction that the Whitmers are giving to this project. And so this is starting to look like a movement, something that is religious, that is organized, and that people are in charge of. It's with this backdrop that Joseph gets section 18 to Oliver Cowdery and David Whitmer with instructions relative to building the church. And this all seems to be driven by Oliver Cowdery. I think he believes that this is going to be a church. He's really pushed this in this direction with the dictation of the Book of Mormon in Harmony, Pennsylvania, and it's becoming more so as they get to Fayette and people are interested. Joseph gives Oliver a charge to rely on the things which are written, presumably the text of the Book of Mormon, which has already been produced up until this point, and suggesting that this writing is concerning the foundation of the church and that this direction from God to Oliver Cowdery is for him to lay this foundation of this church, because people need to be stirred up to repentance, to living the gospel, to be close to Christ. And interestingly, this revelation seems to be to Oliver, and we'll go see in a second that it's to David as well, that Joseph Jr. has done the things that he's been commanded of. And in verse 8 it says, marvel not that I have called him unto mine own purpose, which purpose is known in me. I believe this is signaling that Joseph is not going to be involved in this church. Joseph is trying to get Oliver and David Whitmer to take on this project because Joseph believes that the Book of Mormon is going to be a big seller. He's going to get wealthy off it, and then he can retire to his home in Harmony, Pennsylvania, that he really loves. The revelation goes on to involve David Whitmer and call Oliver Cowdery as a person like Paul, his apostle, somebody who's going to direct the future of the church, kind of a takeover from Jesus moment. It has the admonition to contend against no church, save it be the church of the devil. And we've talked a little bit about how the Book of Mormon replacement text talks about the anti-Catholic bent that I think the Whitmers have. And we see here, this is a revelation to David, and it has this anti-Catholic material in it. And that people need to be baptized in the name of Jesus and endure to the end in order to be saved, because there's no other name under heaven except for Jesus. And just like Christ called 12 disciples in the Americas, there were going to need to be 12 disciples in this latter part of the day. Not 12 apostles. I think there is a real distinction here, the idea of disciples to gather and be the organizational structure for this new church. And the idea that because Oliver's got this revelation, he can testify that he's heard the words of Christ. And Oliver and David are given the charge to determine who those other 12 that will assist them are. So with this, Oliver believes he is the founding of the church, and he starts to get revelations. And so this is the revelation he gets, which is in June of 1829 and is labeled the Articles and Covenants. And it says, Oliver, listen to the voice of Christ, your Lord and your God and your Redeemer, and write the words which I shall command you concerning my church. It reiterates that same understanding from the Doctrine and Covenants section 18, the idea that he's speaking unto Oliver as he is unto Paul as apostle, for he's given the same calling. And in fact, at the end of this revelation, he identifies Oliver as an apostle. Oliver takes this charge really seriously. He picks out parts of 3rd Nephi and also parts of Moroni, which is pretty much that, as we talked about, the first handbook of the church, and incorporates this into this revelation that he is getting and that he's spelling forward as coming from Christ directly to him. So this begs the question, what happened? Because Oliver was starting to get revelation and to form the church and to organize it in such a way that he felt he was being directed directly from Jesus Christ, and yet this is not what happened. Joseph may have regretted his choice here to effectively give the church over to Oliver. In the replacement text of the Book of Mormon, Joseph identifies himself as Joseph, son of Joseph, as a forerunner and foretold by Joseph of Egypt to be a prophet. But more importantly, the Book of Mormon did not sell very well, and so Joseph seemed like he needed to do some other project to engage in some income for himself, and so he organized the church along with Oliver on April 6th, 1830. And Doctrine and Covenants section 20 is basically a rehash of Oliver's revelation of June 1829 that has now got the voice and the signature of Joseph on it. So it seems like Joseph has reneged on this revelation and taken over the church as his own. And we see this especially because in Doctrine and Covenants 20, Oliver and Joseph are designated elders, but later by 1835, that designation is first and second elder, with Joseph more prominent. The most heartbreaking event of this whole endeavor is to me encapsulated in the revelation that is now known as Doctrine and Covenants section 19. It's to Martin Harris, and according to the header, it's in the summer of 1829. It may have been as early as that first week that Joseph and Oliver moved to Fayette, New York, or it could be before August 25th when Martin signed an agreement and put a mortgage on his farm for the printing of the Book of Mormon. Joseph himself dates this to March of 1830 in his 1838 history, but it seems likely that it's more probable it's in June of 1829. This revelation is heavy on the suffering, the idea that everybody who does not repent has to suffer, that woes are going to go forth with weeping, wailing, and gnashing of teeth, and there's going to be endless torment and eternal damnation, because that is what is written in the Book of Mormon. And to Martin, God says, I will explain unto you this mystery, for it is meet unto you to know. And I speak unto you that are chosen in this, even as one that you may enter into my rest. So the setup is that Martin is going to be saved as long as he does exactly what he's told. Because if he doesn't, he's going to get this terrible torment. But Martin is a universalist. He doesn't believe that God is going to torment people. He believes that God is going to save everybody. And so this is a good insight into what the lost manuscript contained, because it absolutely did not contain these ideas of eternal punishment or endless torment. Because if they had, he would not need to be told at this point that it's not really endless punishment or not really endless or eternal torment, because this is God's punishment. And these words, eternal and endless, are just words for God. Joseph is explaining to Martin why the words of the new manuscript produced in harmony with Oliver are different than the ideas that he has produced with Joseph when he was there in 1828. Martin is told that God uses these words to work on the hearts of men, basically trick them, because if they didn't believe that it's going to be terrible in the afterlife, they would not repent. Martin's going to be let into this great secret, but he's not to tell anybody because they cannot bear this kind of meat. They need to just be on the milk of the gospel, which is this lower understanding that they need to be coerced into repenting. But Martin is coerced by this revelation because it commands him to not cover his own property, but to impart freely to the printing of the Book of Mormon. So God not only tricks people, but he coerces them, and that's just the way that it's supposed to be. And if he doesn't comply, misery will be what he receives. Yea, even the destruction of thyself and property. Pay the debt contracted with the printer. Release thyself from bondage. And if you do this, great will be your blessings. You will receive heaven, and you'll obtain treasures of the earth. What kind of God needs that form of coercion? The one that can bring up gold plates? If Joseph had sawed off a corner, he could sell it to pay for the printing costs. But Martin needs to be involved. His money needs to be involved, and he needs to be pressured into departing with it. And he does. He makes a commitment with Grandin, who then secures a promissory note and mortgage over his farm for $3,000 by August the 25th, 1829. Martin goes on to lose his investment, and he moves to Ohio in a lot of poverty. He continues to give everything he has to the church, and despite many and multiple promises and other endeavors that are supposed to make money, Martin does not profit from the church. His wife, Lucy Harris, divorces him, and he loses almost everything. Section 19 seems to be the ultimate betrayal, because God promises so much, coerces with such pressure, and delivers so very little. Yet it is a powerful mechanism to extract resources, and Joseph uses it multiple times during the course of his life. It's one thing to replace the beginning of the Book of Mormon, but it's quite another thing to justify that change to your audience. What are you going to do? Joseph was confident that he could recover the lost manuscript, but when he couldn't, he had to think about what would happen if he just recounted what he had remembered from the beginning back in 1828. Joseph knew that it was an oral production. There weren't any particular written notes. He couldn't replicate it exactly. He could only approximate it with some of the stories and events and understandings. So consequently, what we know about the lost manuscript, we know because the replacement text makes excuses for itself all over the place about how unsecular it is, how there aren't any details, how it doesn't follow the chronology of the kings, and how it is different than the previous manuscript. But if Joseph doesn't know what has happened to the manuscript, he doesn't know what will happen if the manuscript turns up after the replacement text is now available for people to read. He's worried it's going to discredit him, and so this becomes the basis of these excuses for why the replacement text is needed, and also the idea that God has provided a way to thwart Satan in these endeavors. Section 10 is that mechanism to justify this difference, and it's purported to be in April of 1829, but this can't be the case because of two reasons. One is that he doesn't know that the lost manuscript can't be recovered at this point and won't know till he gets to Fayette. But also, this is an incredibly long section of Revelation, and Joseph is just not doing this early in the piece in the Doctrine and Covenants at this point. It has a lot of similarities to Words of Mormon, which suggests that it is written alongside or after those words are dictated. God in this revelation would account for the new material by suggesting that it was to thwart the evil designs of people willing to discredit Joseph. And it calls Martin a wicked man, which is odd considering that Joseph is reconciled with Martin in March of 1829, and he becomes a witness, of course, in June of 1829. The revelation almost reads like Joseph's internal critic talking to him as a voice. It really does suggest that Satan has taken it into their hearts to alter the words which you have written, that they catch you in the words which you have pretended to translate. If you bring forth the same words, they will alter them. And woe unto those who lie to deceive, because he supposes that others lie to deceive. And begs the question again about these altered words and the idea that Satan flatters people. Again, that you've lied as you pretended to translate. But there is wisdom in preserving something else that can be translated so that you can look righteous. And also a caution that Joseph can't always tell who the wicked are from the righteous. And the idea that there's another record of Nephi that he can use. And this record of Nephi is right down to the time of King Benjamin. And this just echoes almost word for word what is in the Words of Mormon. So you can use this record to publish and fill the gap of the lost manuscript. Along with Doctrine and Covenants 10, Words of Mormon, the excuses that are given in the replacement text, Joseph gives his own version of events at the beginning of the 1830 Book of Mormon with a preface. To the reader, as many false reports have been circulating respecting the following work, and also many unlawful measures have been taken by evil designing persons to destroy me and also the work, I would inform you that I translated by the gift and power of God and caused to be written 116 pages, the which I took from the Book of Lehi, which was an account abridged from the plates of Lehi by the hand of Mormon, which said account some persons have stolen and kept from me, notwithstanding my utmost exertions to recover it again, which again suggests that Joseph has spent quite a bit of time in Fayette trying to get back the lost manuscript and can't. And being commanded by the Lord that I should not translate the same over again, for Satan had put it into their hearts to tempt the Lord their God by altering the words that they did read, contrary from that which I translated and caused to be written. And if I should bring forth the same words again, or in other words, if I should translate the same over again, they would publish that which they had stolen, and Satan would stir up the hearts of this generation, that they might not receive his work. But behold, the Lord said unto me, I will not suffer that Satan shall accomplish his evil designs in this thing. Therefore thou shalt translate from the plates of Nephi until ye come to that which ye have translated, which ye shall have retained. And behold, ye shall publish it as the record of Nephi, and thus I will confound those who have altered my words. I will not suffer that they shall destroy my works. Yea, I will show unto them that my wisdom is greater than the cunning of the devil. Wherefore, to be obedient unto the Lord and commandments of God, I have through his grace and mercy accomplished that which he hath commanded me respecting this thing. I would also inform you that the plates of which have been spoken were found in the township of Manchester, Ontario County. So we have Words of Mormon, Doctrine and Covenants 10, and Joseph's preface to the 1830 Book of Mormon, all saying exactly the same thing in the same kinds of phrases. And the manuscript never turns up. So this preface is dropped from the Book of Mormon, and this idea is just kept within Doctrine and Covenants 10 and kind of loosely around the understandings of the Book of Mormon, because when you try to examine this line of thinking, it is crazy. Why would God spend thousands of years preparing for this particular event, but he won't change the Book of Mormon to the kinds of things that Joseph will discover really soon into his time as prophet and president of the church? Somehow God didn't know that the lost manuscript would never turn up and we would never have to defend it. God spent a lot of time defending it. Joseph spent a lot of time defending it. Mormons spent a lot of time defending it, and yet it was unnecessary. This sounds more like Joseph worried about how the lost manuscript will discredit him if it turns up, because it is real and it doesn't match what he is then producing. One of the other events to happen late June or perhaps into July was the account of the 8 witnesses that they handled the plates given to them by Joseph Smith. These 8 men were either members of the Whitmer household or the Smith household. Christian, Jacob, Peter Jr., and John Whitmer, Hiram Page, the Whitmer's son-in-law, Joseph Smith Sr., Hiram Smith, and Samuel Smith. This all happened in Manchester at and around the Smiths' log home. Now, Doctrine and Covenants section 5, Doctrine and Covenants section 17, and also some remarks in Ether chapter 5 and in Nephi suggested that 3 witnesses would see the plates, and this was, of course, Oliver Cowdery, Martin Harris, and David Whitmer. There is an account in 2 Nephi chapter 11 which suggests that there are going to be other witnesses. So this reads, "And my brother Jacob also had seen him as I have seen him. Wherefore I will send their words forth unto my children to prove unto them that my words are true. Wherefore by the words of 3, God said, I will establish my word. Nevertheless, God sendeth more witnesses, and he proveth all his words." This is slightly ambiguous, and it may not be the genesis of the idea that other people will see the plates, but certainly by the end of June and into July, Joseph felt it comfortable that he could figure out a way that 8 more people could have a witness and attest to this. The witness statement says, "Be it known to all nations, kindreds, tongues, and people unto whom this work shall come, that Joseph Smith Jr., the translator of this work, has shown unto us the plates of which have been spoken, which have the appearance of gold, and as many of the leaves as the said Smith has translated, we did handle with our hands. We also saw the engravings thereon, all of which had the appearance of ancient work and of curious workmanship. And this we bear witness, that the said Smith has shown unto us, for he has seen and hefted and known of a surety that the said Smith has got the plates of which we have spoken, and we give our names to the world to witness unto the world that which we have seen, and we lie not, God bearing witness of it." There are a few accounts later that suggest that the 8 did not see the plates altogether, that Joseph showed the plates or something to groups of 4 and 4, and this seems to be quite in line with the idea of those treasure acquisitions, the idea of 4 people going to get and receive something in terms of this treasure digging culture. After the bank crisis of 1837, Stephen Burnett wrote a letter to Lyman White talking about his experience examining Martin Harris's witness. He said that when I came to hear Martin Harris state in public that he never saw the plates with his natural eyes, only in vision or imagination, neither Oliver Cowdery nor David Whitmer, and also the 8 witnesses never saw them and hesitated to sign that instrument for that reason, but were persuaded to do it, and the last pedestal gave way and my view of our foundations was sapped. We don't have a signed copy of this witness statement, but it is likely with the original manuscript, which most of that got lost. We do have the copy that is in the printer's manuscript. But the idea that the witness statement that they signed may not have been representative of their experience is a really interesting one. The Whitmers and the Smiths stood to get the most gain from the publication of the Book of Mormon. This was integral to their very, very poor circumstances for both families, that this endeavor should succeed. And of course, they were from that same folk magic culture that believed in this esoteric view of things through the mind's eye. Governor Thomas Ford, in his later recollection of the Illinois events, he said, and I don't know where he got this from, but that the 8 witnesses were asked to stare at a box and see the plates and not get off their knees till they saw them. And so the idea that this might have been somewhat coerced, or that they might have imagined it because of their magic worldview is a really important distinction. And because they are not independent witnesses and subject to the benefit of the Book of Mormon publication, it is tricky to ascertain their ability to be objective in this regard. They are likely to be very sincere and did witness to their understanding of this event, even though actually Christian Whitmer, David, and Peter Jr. all died really soon into the Piece of Mormonism. They gave their life for the movement, and so it's really tricky to ascertain their independence. And so we don't know if Joseph was able to construct a prop, which he then was able to show them, or at least convince them that this was something that they could attest to, or whether he utilized their folk magic understanding to enable them to see something in their mind's eye that they felt was tangible. But we do know that their inclusion as witnesses was definitely a secondary thought and did provide some basis for the Book of Mormon for which it didn't have before. And this was a huge advantage to the Book of Mormon project. Let's discuss Mormonism's black box. We've spent the last few videos detailing what's going on in June of 1829, both the Book of Mormon production, the copyright, the witnesses, the idea of an organization of the church. There is a lot going on in June of 1829. And then we have July, August, and September, where pretty much nothing happens. We know from Joseph's October 22nd letter that he arrives in Harmony on the 4th of October, and he's been traveling for a few days. But what has he been doing the last 3 months? August 25th, there's an agreement struck between Grandin and Joseph and Martin Harris for a mortgage on his farm. And we know prior to that time, Joseph has been going back and forth to Rochester with Martin and trying to enter some form of negotiations to get the Book of Mormon printed. And this does not solidify till that date on the August 25th. There is a whole lot of time not accounted for by Joseph, by Oliver, by Hiram, even by Martin Harris. There is some discussion that the Whitmers are having some success in Fayette in converting their neighbours, and so there's some baptisms taking place. But even then, where are these 3 months? What is going on? After the rush of June 1829, this seems odd and out of place. And I don't have any great answers for you. So if you have some, please give them in the comments. By early October 1829, Joseph is back in his Harmony cottage. He hasn't been there much, but there's probably some crops that need to be taken out, and Emma's little business with regard to cheese and milk is probably still thriving. Joseph writes a letter back to Manchester to Oliver on the October 22nd. And we get the first indications here that there are some persecutors in Harmony that they've had to leave because of. But now they're under censure themselves, so they're getting pushback from their community. We don't know a lot about the incident that has meant that Oliver and Joseph have left Harmony, Pennsylvania to continue the Book of Mormon project in Fayette. But Joseph does speak about this time in his 1838 history, and this is recorded in Joseph Smith History 1, verse 75, suggesting that professors of religion have intentions of mobbing them, and they're only counteracted by the influence of my wife's father's family under divine providence, who have become very friendly to me and who were opposed to mobs. This is probably due to Pennsylvania's really strong stand for religious freedom, because William Penn, who founded Pennsylvania, was somebody who believed in religious tolerance. And so this was a major part of the foundation of the state and what people really believed in. And so the idea that Joseph and Oliver would have been persecuted by some form of religionists meant that the community might have rallied around to either protect them, like Joseph says in Joseph Smith History 175, or that in this idea with this letter that they're religiously being called to censure because of these kind of protections. Another thing that Joseph identifies in this letter to Oliver is the idea that Josiah Stoll is going to come into some money and put it towards books of the Book of Mormon. Effectively, Mr. Stoll is going to become an investor in this project. And this tracks later because in February of 1830, Joseph sends out Oliver, Joseph Knight Sr., Josiah Stoll, and Hiram Page to get the copyright from Canada, and that would suggest that those four men are financially invested, and we know that Oliver is. We know that Joseph Knight Sr. is providing means for the production of the translation, and now Josiah Stoll, and it's likely Hiram Page was also a financier also. And how is Joseph going to employ this money? Because he's incredibly poor. What is he going to do with it? We have a photo from the late 1800s that show that Joseph had put a huge addition onto his house. He dragged over a salt box house and attached it to his own house, providing 8 to 12 new bedrooms to his house. Here's another picture into the 1900s, which the old lean-to has been replaced by a frame house, but you can still see the addition to Joseph Smith's cottage on the right. And this looks absolutely like he's providing some accommodation. He's planning to stay there long term, of course, for his family, for his parents and his younger siblings who do not have a house. They are currently homeless and living with Hiram in the log cabin. We have the letter that Oliver then writes back to Joseph on November the 6th, 1829. And it's quite a long letter talking about his feelings of the gospel. Oliver and Hiram are engaged at this point in producing a printer's manuscript and delivering pages to Grandin for printing. And it seems from Oliver's letters that he's hugely engrossed in the religiosity of this project. Martin is also involved at this point with Hiram. They're traveling back and forth to Fayette, and Oliver reports on the printing, and also Thomas B. Marsh taking some of the printing pages as he goes preaching. He also tells Joseph that he's up to Alma with regard to copying the manuscript. We have another letter from Oliver on the 28th of December talking about how Joseph Smith's father's going to come get him. There is a copyright dispute with Abner Cole over printing parts of the Book of Mormon, and Joseph Smith Sr. is going to come get his son in order to resolve that dispute. Oliver speaks positively of his experience with the printing of the Book of Mormon, including the idea that he's involved with the actual printing of the text. And so that's what's happening in this 3-month period from October, November, and December of 1829.